I'd like to introduce Daniel Ben-chitrit, and I'm not sure I said your name right, but I apologize if I didn't. And just so you know, Daniel is the Senior Product Manager for Cyber and Open Source Threat Intelligence at Authenticate. He brings almost a decade of experience building cyber security products and performing threat hunting to support threat intelligence collections and analysis across both the public and private sectors. Now, I've seen his talk, and I have to say again, I love the fact that this is not a here's a tool, here's a tool, here's a tool. This talk is going to be about process. It's about what do you have to think about to keep yourself safe and to do things in an organized, coordinated manner. So, Daniel, I'm really looking forward to your talk here. Take it away.
Thanks, Micah. So, thank you everyone for joining the talk. We're going to be focusing on how we can leverage automation in OSINT collection. So before we get too far, let's quickly just go over an agenda for what the talk is going to be about. We're going to start off with an introduction, move into some discussions about open source intelligence, automation, how they work together. We'll talk about some pitfalls to be wary of, how to practice safe automation, and then we'll end up with a case study of how might automation look at scale might look. So to start, who am I? So my name is Daniel ben-chitrit. I'm a senior product manager at Authenticate for cyber threat intelligence and open source intelligence in our research platform as a total thing. In my free time, I am definitely a cybersecurity junkie. I love to see what's new and happening in cybersecurity. I do a little bit of research, both in the CTI and in OSINT on the side. And I like writing scripts with my own tools and other tools that are out there. Outside of work, food, beer, wine, whiskey, love all of them. Really interested in all of those things. And I have a Peloton. I actually don't have a Twitter, but I do have a Peloton. So follow me there, not on Twitter. So before we get too deep, let's talk about what we mean when we say automation. What is required to something to be considered automation? And what areas of automation are we going to focus on today? So generically, automation just means something is being done automatically. And this usually means limiting the manual input. The less manual or human input, the better. Obviously, humans are going to be involved in many areas of automation, but the goal is going to be removing as much human interaction from that process as possible. So take the graphic that you see here. While it seems the robot, in this case automation, is better, it's actually different than what the humans are doing. So we need to be mindful of not automating the wrong thing and making sure that we understand the limitations of automation. For OSINT collection, or at least for this talk, let's define automation slightly differently. While there are areas of OSINT that full automation is available and it may make sense to use, in general, there's going to be more human or manual involvement in OSINT collection, at least at the start of the process. You might ask, why? Why is that the case? Well, human input is one of the most, if not the most important and critical inputs for collection and targeting of OSINT data. So for today's talk, we will be focusing on the automation of the actual collection itself, while processing and analysis can also be automated. Not going to be focusing on those for this talk. Automation of inputs into the process is possible, as I mentioned. And, we will talk about at least one use case where that is what you will see happening. But it really isn't the only way to use and leverage automation for OSINT collection. So for today, we'll consider something like an analyst putting a website into a queue for automated monitoring or screenshotting an automated collection task. However, having that analyst manually run a script against one or multiple websites is not going to be considered automation. That's really just technology-enabled collection, which is a completely different talk. So we just talked a little bit about automation. The other side is open source intelligence, or OSINT. So what part of OSINT are we going to be focusing on today? Well, the first, I love this graphic because one of the things that people just don't realize when it comes to OSINT is that it's a really large area of intelligence itself, from cyber threat to persons of interest to financial crimes. But as it's grown with technology, is now actually overlaps with most, if not all, other areas of intelligence. I mean, you see GON, SIGINT, human. OSINT is embedded in all of these intelligence, different types of intelligence now. So for this talk, we're really going to be focusing on automation and the impacts on the cyber threat, business intelligence, and general OSINT collection pieces. And that is a small area of OSINT. Open source intelligence does mean open source, obviously. So that can include things behind paywalls, or it could require an account to access that data. But for today, we're going to be focusing on passive collection. So you don't need any sock puppets to do anything we're going to talk about today. What we do talk about today could be leveraged for sock puppet type automation, but there are going to be more nuances and additional steps to doing something like that. We'll also be focusing on online collection. If you're not aware, OSINT does span non-digital elements as well. So today we are going to be focusing on those digital elements, specifically focusing on digital website content. So that could be a screenshot of a website, but it could also be something like the web server assets themselves. So let's just talk about automation and OSINT, but also kind of data science in general. So while this talk is going to be focused around collection and OSINT, there are other pieces that can be automated in general. So looking at this graphic, you can kind of see 5 different levels or steps in the data science, data analysis process. We see at the start, there might be some human input or require some level of manual input because we have to identify the sources we want to capture. And the last step being dissemination of the analysis. It might be automated. You might finish the analysis and then have it emailed out to everyone, but there's going to be some human involvement depending on the output for that. So we're going to really focus on the middle 3 boxes. So automation for OSINT and in general intelligence, comes in 3 major flavors: collection or harvesting of the data, which again is the focus for today, processing and automation of the processing of the data after it has been collected, and the automation of analysis of that data. To put it simply, automation can help me gather the data I need and make sure it's easy to access, make that data that I've collected usable and easy to understand, and allow me to garner insight and value from that collected data. There are some examples of how automation relates to each of these different areas. And there are many, many more that just aren't on the slide. I could have a slide on each of these and not cover all of the different areas. You will notice some overlap, and that's really common, especially with the processing and the automation or processing stage. Data processing happens at every single one of these stages as the storage of the data. And we will talk a little bit about how automation of processing does happen when you focus on collection. We really aren't going to focus on the post-processing, but we will be focusing on some of the processing that comes from the OSINT collection. Now, you can automate all of these steps in one, but it's going to become difficult to do that. In some cases, it actually might be impossible to just automate all of the steps. You're always going to need to have some sort of human involvement when it comes to OSINT data collection and analysis. Each flavor has its own unique nuances, though. So post-processing of non-standard data and information can be very difficult to automate. Everyday technologies are getting better. we are seeing techniques improve, and it is becoming easier to work with non-standard or non-homogeneous data. However, processing of standard, homogeneous, and machine-readable data, on the other hand, much more easy to automate. So while we're not going to focus on that today, if your data is easy to post-process, if it is machine-readable, I highly recommend looking at your options for automation of post-processing, because that can really just save you and your analysts tons of time, even if you just heavily reduce the human involvement that's needed when it comes to post-processing. Now, if you think processing data is hard, when you start to think about automation of the data analysis itself, it could be like opening a can of worms. From the same complexities that we run into with post-processing, especially of those non-standard data formats, think, image recognition, all the way to artificial intelligence and machine learning, there are so many areas of analysis that can be automated. However, in most cases, what we tend to see is the juice just is not worth the squeeze for the effort of trying to automate that analysis. And we could spend a whole talk on each of these other two areas of OSINT automation, but for today's talk, we are going to focus on the automation of OSINT collection. Many believe that this is the easiest area of OSINT analysis to automate. And the actual collection itself is, in general, easier for a couple of different reasons. One, there are a variety of methods and a variety of tools out there in the open that you can leverage. And the other is that there's a very low barrier of entry to start collecting a lot of this data, because it is open source. It is available to all of these people. So sure, there may be many areas of collection that are harder than others. Think video collection, that can be much, much more difficult than just doing a web scrape or a screenshot. And human intervention for the targeting and source identification can still be required. But if you have well-defined examples and well-defined use cases, automation can in general take over those easy day-to-day types of tasks that you have. It is very important, especially when we are thinking about collection, to make sure that collection is tuned, to make sure you're getting the right information. It's critical. If you try to just do the fire hose method for collection, it's not going to work well for most use cases, because you're going to end up filtering that data down, and you're going to take all of that precious time that you are trying to save with automation and almost spending more to do that filtering. So you might think, why are we even talking about using automation in OSINT collection? Or if it's easy, that just must be the only reason. And that's just wrong. Sure, the low barrier to entry, the time-saving benefits, all of these things are very beneficial and are reasons to use automation when it comes to OSINT collection. But there are many other reasons to do it as well. Let's just think of some of the common issues that come along with OSINT and cybersecurity in general, and how this might play together. I'm sure we all know that the surface, deep, and dark web are huge, especially when you put them all together. And it's impossible to manually try and collect the data from all of them. And even if you do have a small scope that you're trying to collect from, it's very time consuming to go and manually have to crawl through and find the data that you're interested in. Some potentially big issues actually come from this. What am I missing? What areas am I not scraping? What sources am I not collecting from? Did I miss information because I got there too late? Is it no longer accessible for me to collect? Automation is not a silver bullet here. If you don't know a website to collect, you're not going to be able to collect that data. If you automate and you still don't get to the data source in time, you're not going to be able to collect it, because it's still going to be gone. But what automation does allow you to do is allows you to more quickly go and collect that data, which limits the likelihood that it's going to be removed before you have the chance of collecting it. And it also allows you to more easily target all of the sites that you want to target, or any websites or any areas that you have interest in collecting. And you can do it at a much higher frequency because you're not limited by the human bandwidth. On the opposite side of OSINT collection, you have highly specific analyst-driven collections. As it says on the slide, and I'm aware of it, I'm sure everyone else is, analysts already are short on time. There's not enough hours in the day to do the job. But without data collection, the analysts actually can't do their job, right? Which is analyzing the collected data. So they end up spending most, if not all of their time collecting the data manually and making sure that they have the information available. So as we mentioned, that can cause some issues like missing data. But when you start to think about it from the analyst point of view, the deadlines, the fast moving incidents, we're just exacerbating the issues that we just previously talked about. Again, automation is not going to fix this completely, but if there's a way to take the things that can't be manually collected or don't have to be manually collected and build the collection around automation, you'll be able to save analysts time, but which is important, but it's actually almost more important because you're going to improve the output of the analysis that's being done, because these analysts are going to be able to spend more time doing analysis instead of doing collection. Similar to that example, something that's becoming more and more common is investigations or collections that are going international. So now you have to think, am I collecting my data at a regionally appropriate time, or do I have to collect something in the future? And being able to automate that type of collection not only saves the analyst time, as we previously mentioned, but can actually reduce the stress of them having to wake up or remember that, oh my God, 2 a.m. I have to go and log onto this website to collect this information to make sure it looks like I'm actually coming from that location. The last item I'm going to touch on for automation and why should you use automation for OSINT collection is a very cybersecurity focused area, and that's time to remediation. One of the biggest issues, if not the largest issue in cybersecurity, as we see with the explosion of SOAR in cybersecurity and threat intelligence, is this time to remediation. A great example I like to use is new malware gets found. You need to get all of the IOCs as soon as possible. So you make sure that you can block them and make sure you're not compromised. Block all of the command and controls, find all of the signatures, do reverse malware analysis, and so much more. So from that, we've seen this rise in SOAR platforms, automation of the SOC, and automation of OSINT is a big piece of that. There's so many moving parts to threat intelligence and cybersecurity that the ability to collect the related artifacts, think malicious files or supporting information, think screenshots of a phishing website, etc., is key to the incident response, and a lot of the times can easily be automated. Without automation of this information and this collection, you're going to run into a lot of these similar issues we've had. But now we're talking about it during an incident, and that can make it much, much worse because you're spending that precious time that you have, instead of remediating and trying to solve a problem, going out and collecting the information you need to be able to solve the problem itself. OSINT cybersecurity is a growing field, so I do expect to see a lot more of these types of use cases in the future as well. So we've talked a little bit about why we might want to do automated collection of OSINT, but that really is just half the battle. And we have to think about some other things as well. The first place we have to think is storage. Where do I store all of the data I've collected? There are a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself before you can decide, volume of the storage, etc. But to start, I always like to ask myself when I'm trying to think about this, how safe and how sensitive are the data that are being collected? Every use case is going to be different. Generally, I like to recommend using dirty networks or some sort of segmented storage in automation for any sort of web asset collection for a number of reasons. So obviously, if you're targeting a cyber criminal, if you know you're going to be dealing with malware or other malicious artifacts, you should already be using segmented and dirty networks. But the web can be a dangerous place. Sometimes when you're collecting data that you think, oh, this must be safe, I don't have anything to worry about, there's something malicious could be lurking in the shadows, and that could cause a breach that you were not going to be prepared for. So risk tolerance is really important when it comes to storage. If you have a very low risk tolerance using segmented storage, segmented networks, it increases the security of your system, but it does also increase the level of effort needed to sustain the automation, the collection, and the storage, as well as actually increasing the level of effort to perform the analysis and data science that you want to do, especially if parts of that data do live on a clean network. The other area of storage that I'm sure everyone's thinking about is, what type of data am I storing? How much data am I storing, etc. If you're storing JSON versus or a database or a file, the storage has to accommodate a variety of different types of content usually. And then encryption. Do I need to encrypt my data? Is there security or reasons I need to? It does help protect sensitive data if you are dealing with, personal information, but there is a performance impact that you do have to think about when you start talking about encryption. I will note, if you are using a third party, and I highly recommend looking at third party solutions for automation, see if they provide the storage, or if they're going to put the onus on you to do the data storage yourself. If they store the data, a lot of these complexities could be solved. So if they do offer it, definitely look at those options. The last piece I'll get into before we go too far into actually how we might do this automation is hiding the automation and the security around automated collections. So managing your footprint, reducing your attribution, and hiding your activities. Well, I'm sure many of us, and many of you listening, understand the need for many of these things. And I'm sure we all use great tradecraft, and we're all smart about our online footprint when we're doing manual investigations and collections. Many of the times when you're setting up automation networks and these tasks, you just don't think about it, or the people involved don't know about it. So if you're not going to use a third-party solution to run the automation, there are a number of things you have to care about, from dirty network and misattributed networks, to how frequently the tasks have to run, to rotation of the IP addresses and the networks that are being used, to make sure that you aren't getting blocked and that actors can't trace it back to your organization. So using a third-party automation solution doesn't always solve these, but it can add that extra layer of protection. So again, going back, third-party solutions can help you a lot when you're looking at including automation into your processes. But no matter the solution you are using, you have to ask yourself some of these questions. And these might be some questions you ask that third party as well. Do I have access to the right locations I need to blend into the content I'm collecting? Am I collecting something from Kiev and my network is located in Kansas? That's going to look very, very weird, most likely. Do I have access and control over what my session might look like, such as user agent, make sure that my session looks normal, etc. Another piece is, does the network I'm using have any relation back to me? If I'm using a VPN, can that VPN connection be traced back to my organization? Am I using fully misattributed network that can't be related back to an organization? Those are the things that you need to think about, not just for sensitive collections, but it's also important when you're thinking about dealing with malicious or malware content, because that could spread back to your enterprise. And lastly, think about, do my collections look too robotic? Third parties might have some information around this of how they mitigate some of those problems. But if you're building an internal solution or using internal solutions, you need to make sure you work closely with your operations and your networking teams. Just remember, basic precautions when it comes to automation can do a lot. You don't have to go over the top when it comes to hiding the automation. As we say at Authenticate, who are you trying to fool? If you're trying to fool a nation state actor, you're gonna have to spend a lot more time and effort to do that. So now let's dive into the actual automation of OSINT using a real life example. So over the years, one of the areas that I have just been fascinated with in the world of cybersecurity is the newly registered domain. There's so much information that can be gathered just by monitoring what domains are being registered. So I decided, let's use this and a little bit of OSINT automation to find some interesting things about new domains. And boy, did we find some interesting information. Before I dive just into the findings themselves, I do want to give an overview of what we did and how we did it. So we came in with a focus of phishing domains, as you can see by the title slide. So the essence of phishing domains, they're notorious for being up fast and down fast. They go up within 24 to 48 hours of registration in general, and they might be taken down 72 hours to 2 weeks later. So time was of the essence. So I took one day of newly registered domains, January 3rd, 2021, and I looked at all of the domains and I picked the word bank. So I went to the domains and I reduced the list from about 50,000 to 150 domains, all that included the word bank in them. Finance tends to be one of the, if not the most heavily targeted phishing industries. So we thought bank would be a good example. We ended up being right about that. So I wanted to track and monitor these domains, and working with my team at Authenticate, we were able to set up a system to run the automation. So we took our web harvesting APIs, a product that we have, and we set it to collect visual images of the website. We leveraged our segmented and encrypted storage to store the collected data, and then we passed it through our automated malware scanning to make sure that the files were safe when we downloaded them, download those screenshots to our local system for the analysis that we did. We wanted to see what websites were down at the start, how did that change over the course of a week or two, and then we also wanted to track, websites that were blocked and unblocked, or vice versa, as well as how websites changed over a period of time. Was it a perked page one day? Did it have content the next? We went into this, this automation setup with some basic tenets that we just covered previously in this talk. Luckily, the API we were using allowed granular control over our fingerprint and a number of other things. So we knew we were going to be dealing with some obviously bad sites. An example is chasebank.xyz. Nothing good is going to be happening on that website. So we made sure that we only collected screenshots and images of the websites. We didn't want to do any download of assets or play with anything else, because we did have a short period of time we were looking to run this experiment. We also knew people could be watching these websites. So we made sure to rotate our locations while we did the automation. We mainly stayed in the continental US, but we also did use some of our European locations as well to hide up where we were coming from. We also tracked the responses we got every day to make sure that every domain was being tracked and that we could see how things were changing day to day. And leveraging our encrypted storage to host all the data, we didn't have to worry about managing the actual storage itself. We did change browser fingerprints every day, and every time we did a call to collect a web scrape, examples being changing our user agents. And we did this mainly to make sure that there was no clear linking between our requests, that anyone who potentially was hosting multiple of the websites we were interested in could connect all of these daily automation collections, daily automated collections. We also, on a day-to-day basis, rotated the fingerprints to make sure the same request fingerprint wasn't showing up. We also ran the websites at different random times with random weights and in a random order. So we weren't going to the same website every day at the same time. So as I mentioned, we started with about 150 domains, all that had the word bank in them, somewhere in the domain name. So out of those, and we took about 2 weeks, we saw some very interesting things. And the numbers you see on the slide are roughly where we ended up at the end of our monitoring. about 20 clear and obvious phishing websites. 15% of the domains we targeted were phishing over the course of the 2 weeks we did it. Not too surprising. We took a pretty basic term. It's a highly phished industry. Nothing crazy there. 20 websites were valid, and about 20 websites were just not live, which is also just not surprising when we limited the research to such a short period of time. Some of the things we saw that were interesting were these, 5 weird websites. These are things like showing a file system. It's a malicious website, which is not a phish, or something that looked fishy, but we couldn't easily confirm that it was a phish. I didn't spend too much time checking on those, but we might have been able to determine if they were phish later. And then the rest of these things were parked pages, domains for sale, the things you would normally expect when looking at newly registered domains. So looking at these statistics, some interesting things we noticed. So you'll see here an image of actually one of the websites that we collected. Obviously, it's a phish. This does not look like a real website, and clear as day. So some of these websites, and this was actually one of them, was not available on day one. But I think this was on the third day. This and another website, which I'll get to, they just became live, and it was obviously clearly a phish. We had a couple websites that were actually immediately blocked. They were, taken down saying this is a malicious content or dangerous content. You can't access it. But then the following day or 2 days later, the website was up. It was still clearly a phish, but it was marked as clean. So that was a very interesting thing that we saw happen a couple times over the 150 domains we looked at. We also saw a couple of duplicate websites. The example in the slide here is actually one of them. We saw this exact same layout targeting a different bank with just different logos and different colors and a different bank name on a completely different website and domain name. So we by no means covered all of the ways that automation could be involved and used in this type of use case. I could spend hours or more time talking about ways you could leverage automation, other areas of automation within OSINT collection itself, but not only that, but also with the processing and the analysis. If I had more time to dive deeper into some of the additional ways to leverage it. But I do think this is a great example of how you might go about taking this automation of OSINT collection, specifically of web assets, and in this case, screenshots, interacting with a secure storage solution and using it to find some very interesting things, even after only spending 2 weeks of monitoring. Obviously, we could go into way more into depth on how do we store this type of data on dirty networks if we needed to, how to collect the actual web assets and do analysis of that code. Could we find phishing kits? Could we find similarities in the code itself and start to actually do some more attribution around the data we collected? So hopefully this example illuminates just some of the ways that you can implement automation in your OSINT collection, both at small scale investigations that you might be doing, as well all the way up to the mass OSINT collection. A lot of the tenets that we talked about and I showed in this example hold true not just for the small cases that I ran, but as well for those large mass OSINT collections. So I want to thank you for listening to my talk. I would love to take any questions that you guys have. And here's my contact information. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email if you have any questions or want to learn more about this. I don't have a Twitter, so you can't follow me there. But yeah, please feel free to ask any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel, for your wonderful talk there. And I think a lot of people are really looking at the things that you mentioned, the things that Matt mentioned, the things that Chris Poulter mentioned, and really getting a better picture that automation isn't just grabbing all of the things off of Facebook, but it can be interacting with Twitter, doing repeated searches, or in your case, the case study here, investigating some parked domains. Now, some of the things that you mentioned are not familiar to a lot of our audience. For instance, you mentioned a parked domain. Can you explain that just a little bit more about what a parked domain is and what might give you a clue that something is a parked domain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a park domain is a domain that's live. It's being hosted by a hosting provider, and usually it will either say this is a park domain, which then is obviously clear. A lot of the times it will be something that's trying to be sold. They'll say this domain is for sale, something like that. So if you ever go to a domain and you get an error, you know the domain's not live. It says, doesn't resolve. If you do get a live page and it seems like it's pretty generic content, it says, hey, this is parked, or hey, this domain is for sale, then you might be looking at a parked domain.
Excellent. One other term that you mentioned several times, I'm familiar with it, and I know that many of our people are, the people that work more in cyber defense, defer, but a lot of people aren't clear on what a dirty network is. What makes it dirty, and why do we care? You did mention some of this in the slide, but I just figured I would have you talk a little bit more about a dirty network and what that is.
Yeah, it's a great question, and a dirty network to one person might mean something different to another person. To me and in general, dirty networks are where you don't have to worry about what's happening on that network. If you're dealing with malicious content like malware, you don't have to worry about it because it's dirty, it's not clean, it's not your normal traffic's not going on it. Usually dirty networks are segmented or there are protections around it so that traffic can't get out of it. Another key area, especially when it comes to open source intelligence, is the misattribution of it. I can stand up a network that I can run malware on, but it could still track back to my company. And I might not want that when I'm doing open source intelligence or even cyber threat intelligence research. I might want to be, a random person. And that's why one of the things I like to do is go to, Starbucks or something and use their Wi-Fi. So it doesn't track back to me in any way, that the network. But that's not necessarily a dirty network, because if I do something bad on that network, it could spread to other people's computers. Now, I'm not a malicious person, so I'm not going to go and do malware analysis on Starbucks network. I would use a dirty network for that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, and for that really well thought out presentation. I love how ordered it was and how each piece built on the other. So I know that there's some questions for you, mostly about your Peloton and how that's a bicycling cult thing. I'm not going to touch.
It's a cult. It's a cult, I can tell you.
It is confirmed. It is a cult. All right, Daniel, thank you so much.